Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Box. I'm JC. I hope you're all doing well. Today I bring you yet another episode of Arsenal Analysed, and today we'll be breaking down the numbers and stats of Benjamin White, a recent signing for Arsenal. One that's probably gone on a little longer than most wanted, a player that no one probably expected Arsenal to target and sign for the upcoming Premier League season. Now my job today is to give you an idea of what to expect from Benjamin White when we finally do see him feature in an Arsenal shirt. And if you enjoyed today's video, do hit that like button and subscribe if you're new around here. But let's waste no time at all and dive straight into those numbers. Kicking off with the basics, name of course Benjamin White, a fairly young chap aged just 23, a running theme for most of the signings that Arsenal have made this summer. It looks as though we are building a young team, long-term project, plenty of resale value for most of the boys and potentially some of the boys that we sign over the coming weeks before that transfer window closes. A fairly tall centre-back at 1.89 centimetres. English, of course, always carries a slightly higher premium in the Premier League. A centre-back by trade, but he is very versatile, being able to play at right-back if needed, and even central defensive midfield if called upon. Right-footed, and his contract is a long-term one, running all the way up until June 2026. And a fee reported somewhere in the region of around about £50 million. Potential clauses included in that as well. The usual stuff, things like certain appearances, cup competitions, so on and so forth. But those are the basics out of the way. Let's dive into some numbers. The first piece of information that we're going to analyse today is heat maps. We've got Ben White on the left, Rob Holding in the middle, and David Luiz on the right-hand side. For those of you who did watch Brighton last year, Ben White is more of a progressive ball-playing defender. Rob Holding, I think it's safe to say he's more of an old-school defender, no nonsense. Occasionally picks a pass, but it's not the strongest part of his game. And David Luiz, probably similar to Ben White in the sense that he's able to pick a pass, he's able to progress with the ball. So you can certainly see why someone like Ben White was potentially brought in. Now, Rob Holding is someone that Ben White is going to be competing against for a starting place next season, and I thought it'd be a good comparison to make on screen now, alongside David Luiz, who did feature quite often for Arsenal over the last 2 years. Now, we do know that Ben White can play right back as well as central midfield, something that Rob Holding can't necessarily offer. And aggressively, you can see that both of those heat maps are very, very similar. So I think on the face of things, we probably can't compare them properly with these two pictures here, for example. But I think the stats in the later part of the video will really start to paint a picture on the differences between the two players. Two more heat maps for us to digest together. On the left-hand side, we've got attempted passes, and on the right-hand side, we've got ground duels. Now, what does look really promising and positive is when we look at the amount of attempted passes from Ben White, and generally speaking, the blue lines are the completed passes, and it just goes to show that when we mentioned in the previous slide that he's a progressive ball-playing defender, so he's quite happy to pick the ball up from deep and make passes in the final third, especially when you're chasing a game. You know, he's going to help make up numbers in midfield, and he quite happily will play a diagonal pass as well, which is something that David Luiz did do quite well in an Arsenal shirt. And we do know that Arsenal like to keep possession of the ball, so it's nice to see that he is someone that could potentially come in and slot in very nicely in terms of our passing game and making more of a direct pass a little further up the pitch to try and make things happen. Now, on the right-hand side, we can see ground duels. Now, in the previous slide, we saw that he was more towards the right-hand side in terms of what he offers as a right-sided centre-back. But at the same time, if needing to make numbers up in midfield or even press the ball when out of possession, he isn't afraid to get forward and get hold of that ball. He isn't afraid to maybe come inside a little bit more often as well to put pressure on an opposition. But looking at these two heat maps here, some really promising diagrams to keep in mind. By all means, pause the video and zoom in at this point. A lot of information to take in. Just before we dive into that information though, this and the previous slide, the diagrams were provided by Crabstat, so please go and have a little look at his Twitter page. Plenty of really interesting information on all sorts of different players that are linked with Arsenal. Now, on the left-hand side, we've got Ben White, and on the right-hand side, we've got Rob Holding. In red, we have the possession-based stats, and in blue, we've got the defensive-based stats, all of which compared to other centre-backs in the Premier League. Now, we can see here on screen that they are both very, very different defenders. For example, in blue on the left-hand side, if we look at Ben White here just for a second, aerial duels-wise, only in the top 40%, whereas Rob Holding is in the top 60%. We know he's very, very good in the air. However, Ben White, when it comes to applying pressure, blocking passes, interceptions, far, far better than Rob Holding. However, when we look at possession-based stats, Rob Holding does trump Ben White. But we know that Rob Holding has been playing in an Arsenal side where that is one of the biggest parts of our game, our tactics, if you will. And I do appreciate that Ben White has done a fairly decent job when comparing the two, and that will change now that it is part of a system that he needs to be a part of. But I think there are parts of Ben White's game that really, really show that he will probably start ahead of Rob Holding, unfortunately for him. And when we think back to what we were talking about in the previous slide, Rob Holding is very limited in his ability as a defender. I use the phrase old school defender. I wouldn't exactly say he's a Tony Adams, but he's definitely more limited. And we know what we're going to get with Rob Holding. Ben White, in this slide, it shows that he's more of a modern centre-back. And that's what you need in football nowadays. And some of the next couple of slides will really prove that. This next slide is for all the William Saliba fans out there. And I thought it would only be right to do a comparison between the two, because there are a lot of Arsenal fans out there confused as to why we bought Ben White when we've got Saliba waiting in the wings. A lot of Arsenal fans even saying it was a waste of money. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I thought it'd be a good idea to do a little comparison to see what sort of players they are and how they compare, what they offer that's a little bit different. Now in blue, we've got Ben White, his season at Brighton last year, and then in the red, we've got Saliba from his season over at Nice in France. Now, the one thing that we do need to take into consideration here is there is a big, big quality difference in the two leagues. And it does look like, on this particular diagram at least, that Saliba kind of overpowers him in terms of what he can offer in some respects. So, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one. By all means, pause the video at this point, digest it at your own pace, but let's dive into some numbers. And finally, we get to jump into some numbers. Ben White on the left, Holding on the right-hand side for comparison purposes. All of these stats have been provided by Optastats and are over per 90 minutes. Ben White played a total of 36 games in the Premier League for Brighton last season compared to Holding's 30 appearances for Arsenal. Ball recoveries, 5.3 for Ben White compared to Holding's 4.9. Tackles made per game, 1.4 for White compared to Holding's 1.6. Fouls conceded equal at 0.9 apiece. And up until this point, I'd say they're fairly similar, there or thereabouts. Now, we mentioned in the previous part of the video that Rob Holding is very good in the air. And this next stat kind of confirms that. Ben White only gets involved in around about 2.8 aerial duels compared to 4.7 with Rob Holding. 49.49 success rate for Ben White. 54.55 for Rob Holding. So fairly similar in its successes, but in terms of the duels they get involved in, Rob Holding hands down the winner there. Ground duels on the other hand, Ben White slightly ahead of the curve at 4.6 compared to Rob Holding's 3.8, and very, very similar in the success rates. Just over 50% for both boys there. Clearances per game, 1.8 for Ben White compared to Rob Holding 0.9. And interceptions per game, there or thereabouts at 1 apiece. Now, we do know that Brighton last season, they were defending a lot more. Generally speaking, they will defend over 90 minutes a lot more than Arsenal. They spend large parts of the game without the ball compared to Arsenal, who, especially in that second half of the season, had one of the best defensive records in the Premier League. So it'd be really, really interesting to see how Ben White slots in and how those numbers change whilst in an Arsenal shirt over the course of the upcoming season. Just before we wrap things up then, a few more stats for you guys to take in. And I thought it would be a good idea to have a look at some of these mentioned on screen, because Ben White is a ball-playing defender and Arsenal are a team that like to pass the ball and keep possession. So Ben White, 10.5 times compared to 9.3 when it comes to losing possession. Attempted passes 49.3 for White compared to Holding's 63.5. And this is a really good number here because if we look at the system that Brighton play, they spend long spells without the ball. Arsenal are the opposite, where we spend long spells with the ball, keeping hold of possession. So I think that stat will probably change if we were to look at these numbers again at the end of next season. Both fairly accurate, 83.17 compared to 87.01 in terms of their passing accuracy. And these next few stats are over the course of the season, as opposed to per 90 minutes. 11 clean sheets apiece, 44 goals conceded for Ben White compared to Holding's 26. Yellow cards, 3 for White and 2 for Holding. 1 red card for White and none for Holding. And goals, none each. So, in terms of disciplinary, they're not bad. I can't see it being an issue for Ben White. It would be nice if they could have had a few goals. So there you have it, guys. Arsenal analysed Ben White. Plenty of numbers and stats to digest. I hope I've helped you guys understand Ben White as a player in a little bit more detail and what to expect from him over the course of the upcoming season. Please do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. This is my 3rd video on the channel and I want to get better and better at delivering these videos and understanding the stats so I can analyse them with you more and more. Hit that like button if you have enjoyed today's video. Subscribe if you're new around here. It means the world to me. As Arsenal sign more players over the course of the next few weeks, which I expect us to do so, I'll bring you more Arsenal analysed videos. And do keep an eye out for the very first Arsenal Analysed match review. The season is just around the corner and I'm very much looking forward to diving into some match reports. But for now, I'm JC and I'll catch you in the next one.